In November 1978, violence erupted in a villain's drinking den beneath London's Putney Bridge. The body of gangster Johnny Dark was dragged out with 9 stab wounds to the back, chest, and throat. Dark's killer was on the run, but could not hide for long. Millions knew his face.
Just deliver my message.
Television actor John Bindon played a burly bruiser in Z-Cars, Softly Softly, and Department S. He played the Joker with film and rock stars, and played royal companion to Princess Margaret on the island of Mustique. John Bindon's acting career began in 1967 when he was spotted as a raw new talent for the film Poor Cow.
Tom, is that you?
Yes, it's me, love.
Playing the villain, he seemed a natural.
There, here's your holiday in the sun.
What happened? Who have you done?
I done the safe in Green's Belling office.
You did.
Yes.
Listen, how much you got?
Should be £500 now.
He wasn't an actor at all. I remember him phoning me and saying he'd met someone called Ken Loach, and who was doing a movie, and he wanted him to be in it.
Here's my old man. What's he doing here? He should be at work.
Oh, it's my woman. Joy. No joy here.
There was no nerves. He didn't have any nerves at all, whereas I was straight out of drama school. I was terrified of it. He wasn't scared of the media. He wasn't scared of the camera. He wasn't scared. He wasn't put off in awe of directors or producers. He treated everybody exactly the same.
Bindon was a rising star, chased by casting agents for film and TV. His newfound fame opened doors to showbiz parties and attractive women, such as the model, actress and baronet's daughter, the Honourable Vicki Hodge.
I went up to him and I said, wow, you're the biggest guy I've ever seen. And he said, hi, I'm John Bindon. And he extended a hand that was enormous. And he said, oh, I won't give you that. I've just had a fight and all his knuckles were slightly dislodged. Anyway, I got pissed in the pub that night and picked him up.
Playing another bank robber in his first Wednesday play for the BBC, Bindon became a close friend of actor George Sewell.
The number of accounts, Tony's got the Swiss account.
He was such great company, fantastic. I mean, one of the funniest fellas I've ever met in my life. Never told a joke, just made something funny out of anything anybody said or what he said. You know, he was terrific.
He's always had some beautiful woman on his arm, or going to see some beautiful woman, or coming from some beautiful woman. He was always with someone really attractive.
And he introduced me to Richard Harris and his brother Dermot, and they were having like an Irish sing-song. I'd never experienced anything like this in my life. Intelligence, a sense of humour, and an awesome presence that I had to get to know.
I'm not your slave. I'm not your...
But Vicki Hodge began to discover a side of Bindon she'd seen only on screen.
Yes, I am. Don't touch me.
It began on the balcony outside his parents' 5th-floor flat when she questioned him about his strict upbringing.
I said, I think you're frightened of your father. Well, he was so angry, and we were on the fifth floor, and he put me over the balcony and held me by my ankle. Said, don't you ever say I'm frightened of my father. And that was like my first experience of real violence.
In Department S in 1969, viewers saw Bindon floored by Jason King, a challenging role for Bindon to play.
His nickname, of course, was Biffo. And the reason was because he was frequently biffing people. I saw him hit somebody once in a pub, and I thought he was going to go right through the window. Suddenly, John went, bop, you know, crashed. Down he went. We all left rather hurriedly. Fastest right-hander you've ever seen. You didn't cross him.
But it was menace without control. In 1970, Bindon was filming with Mick Jagger in the gangster movie Performance. Biffo arranged a pub crawl.
Next morning, this particular star was white, shaking, had a terrible time the night before. And I said, why? What happened? He said, John got in a fight. So I said, well, that's par for the course with John. I got in a fight. So he said, no. He said, this wasn't no ordinary fight. He said, there were about 3 of them. He said, and, I couldn't wait to get away. So anyway, John came in and he had this matchbox and he kept rattling it like that in front of this particular person and said to me, do you want to know what's in it? So I said, no, John. And he opened it and there was a thumb in it. He'd had a fight and the guy had stuck his finger in John's mouth and he'd bitten it off, the top joint, and it was still in the matchbox. He said, the guy's been phoning my mum all night. He said, wants it back. He reckons he can get it sewn on. He said, but I'm not going to give it back to him.
The fact is, there's been a little misunderstanding with Ned and I. Tell him that I want to make a meet.
Right, if I see him, I'm supposed to turn him in.
Listen, you, just deliver my message.
I think Bindon always played Bindon. On and off screen, he played himself. This was a violent man. He was brought up in a violent society in the East End of London. He mixed with the sort of people who made a living and bred themselves on violence. And he had it in him. It was instilled in Bindon. It was very, very there. You could see it in his eyes. You could see it in his face.
John Bindon grew up in Fulham, southwest London. At 16, he was sent to Borstal for car theft. 2 years later, he was back, this time for living off a prostitute's immoral earnings. Barely out of his teens, he spent 21 months in Maidstone prison for attacking 3 Scotsmen with a broken bottle. Acting offered Bindon escape from crime, but his reputation for hard living went before him. He was invited to David Bowie's Christmas Eve party in 1973.
I was standing looking at this gentleman with a big red dildo strapped to his forehead. And I said, well, you must be John. And he said, yes, I definitely am. And it was a very big party. Paul McCartney and Linda were there. And we started singing carols. And John had one of those exquisite voices that was just, it was a pleasure to listen to. And so it was just a strange way to meet him. His social skills were well honed. I think one of the things that I liked about him from that first evening of meeting him was his ability to burst into poetry at the drop of a hat and to recite poems. As I got to know him more and more and more, as we became really good friends, it became obvious that he was just talented in every way as far as performance was concerned.
It was on the Caribbean island of Mustique in 1975, as a guest of his famous friends, that the ex-Borstal boy played a Royal Command performance.
In front of Princess Margaret, Bindon did his famous act of hanging half-pint beer mugs by their handles on his erect penis, and it delighted her. She liked that kind of thing.
Her ever-watchful security team did not. On Mustique, John Bindon posed royal detectives a problem. Princess Margaret was in the company of a man she believed was an actor, but they knew as a violent criminal with dangerous friends.
They would be very suspicious of Bindon because they knew what sort of a man he was. But they had the problem of having to bottle it up to themselves because it was no good them going to Princess Margaret. I mean, they just wouldn't dare to say, ma'am, you know, you've got to be very careful with this man. I mean, they would have been dismissed from their job instantly. It would have been an impertinence to do this. So they would have kept a close eye on Bindon, knowing what sort of animal they were dealing with, and not daring to say anything to Princess Margaret.
The animal they were dealing with had dark secrets. Years earlier in his Maidstone cell, Bindon met a man who changed his life. Frankie Mad Axeman Mitchell was a henchman of the Cray twins and one of the most feared criminals in Britain. Bindon had found a role model.
Oh, he worshipped him. He'd say, well, Frankie used to tell me, and Frankie taught me that, and Frankie told me that. And this was his reason why he was almost the way he was. I think that's where John got a lot of his grounding from.
While making his name as an actor, Bindon stayed friends with Mitchell, who introduced him to his friends, the Krays. They later fell out with Mitchell, had him shot and his body dumped at sea. But the Krays and their best man Joe Pyle had grown fond of the tough guy actor.
The twins had a lot of respect for Johnny Bindon. One occasion stands out in my mind when there was a fella in Fulham and he pulled a bit of a stroke on the twins, and the twins got in touch with John. And John, let's say, John looked after him. John did what he had to do. And that was the kind of relationship that he had with the twins. It would be left to John to decide how he would resolve the problem. There wouldn't be a kiss, I can promise you that. You know what I mean?
In the film Poor Cow, Tom's wife became a gangster's mole. In real life, Vicki Hodge found herself playing the same role.
I met the Richardsons, I met the Krays, then I was seeing people stabbed, then I was hearing people recall terrible incidences of violence that I never thought were real. But I was introduced to a world of extreme violence. And it was all like episodes of some police drama to me.
For Bindon, police drama was not enough. Acting the villain could mean fame and fortune. Being the villain meant something more.
Good. When and where?
He didn't just go on the filming and nothing else.
Maybe Ned wants to do me a little damage over some imagined wrong he thinks I've done him.
John would never just go that angle. He liked the life. He liked the grandeur of being one of the chaps, I mean. So he would have stayed on that pathway.
Anybody who wanted to be affiliated with John just called him. He was fists for hire.
While appearing in Get Carter, Bindon was taken for a drive by Vicki.
He said to me, I want you to drive me over to some flats in severe South London. And John says, reverse into this parking space, put your lights off. So this is like high drama, but this is real life. And before we left the flat, he'd got this big kitchen knife out of the drawer, but he tested all the knives before he got them out, and he got one that stopped your hand sliding down. He said, because when you stab somebody, you don't want your hand to go down the blade. It's about 20 minutes later, and he comes running back and jumps into the car, and he's got the knife, but it's covered with blood, and we belt out of there. And I later learned that he cut this guy's arm off, and I was party to that. I wasn't very proud of it, but at the time it went with the territory.
For Vicki Hodge, Bindon's territory was worth the risk.
There was a sexuality, a sensuality. It was just uphill and brilliant and beautiful, and a relationship that I don't regret one little bit. I mean, we were just perfect. We were deadly, but we were perfect. It was true, deep love, and I thought we were faithful to each other, but I since found out that he went off the rocky road.
There were bacchanalian orgies at my house. Everyone would get dressed up. There would be this parade of wild-looking, fabulous actors and musicians trooping around the house. And that was really, it was incredible to watch, because then John was in full form. I think he was born to lead a bacchanalian orgy.
And he used to say, like, you know, something like 6 girls a day. He might be Superman, eh? God.
We had a great bed that was like a boxing ring. And we used to go up there, man, just sit around, you know? Take the joint rolling tray, go up there, roll a few joints, have a drink, and watch everyone perform. And watching John chat someone up was better entertainment than most television. Added to which, you know, he's also good at television and films and acting, so you were getting to see the real thing live. He's very talented.
Playing more sensitive roles, Bindon showed genuine acting ability, but could not contain his dark side for long.
And I dread the coming home, because like Thor would enter the flat and the door would break open and and I'd get a few clumps.
When I went to stay with Vicki Hodge, I became a target as much as Vicki for his wrath.
He was very thoughtful, that he never marked my face.
He held me up against the wall and told me. He said, I like you a lot, but you're dead if you pick up that phone. He was beating her in the other room.
I hadn't, nor have I witnessed anybody as violent as John in my life.
I just heard her bounce off the wall. He was not pleasant to be around when he was on a rampage.
Look, I'm sorry.
Go away.
Now, don't go running around the old
Do you know
woman.
what you've done?
Nobody was more remorseful than John after he physically hurt me or blood was broken. Blue blood was dripping. I mean, John was a baby when it was over.
Yet the public image was that of hero. In 1969, Bindon received a Queen's Award for bravery. He'd plunged into the Thames trying to save a drowning man. Friends heard a more dramatic story.
But what I didn't tell you was that he slung the guy in and then jumped in and saved him.
On screen, John Bindon was earning $20,000 a year, big money in the early 70s. But on his Fulham patch, he was making another $10,000 from protection rackets around the trendy King's Road.
He could go into a bar or a pub, intimidate the landlord, intimidate the customers, demand money and get it and be paid whatever he wanted. Anything.
The publicans would give him £20, £15, £30 to stay away. So he had 20 or 30 calls he could make like that over the course of a week. I think he actually had a book of whether he'd been there or whether he'd not been there. Got £200 or £300 a week at that game.
In today's terms, protection was earning Bindon $100,000 a year. Customers knew him for something else.
He was blessed with a very large...
Rumours.
What he used to do was like get the old chap out and thread 5 half pints onto Willie.
And then another, and one on the end.
I was like, damn. I was surprised, darn surprised.
He advertised it, dropped it in people's laps, faces, hands, handbags, whatever he could. He was very proud.
I don't know how big it was. I never got near him enough for that. I mean, you wouldn't like it on the end of your nose as a walk, put it that way.
He put his prick on the hot plate in the Potters one day with the sausages, lined it up with the sausages, and the lady behind the bar chased him with a knife.
I guess it was a 12-incher, and you could stack 3 pint beer mugs on it.
I think she'd have done him if she'd got a go with him. Not very hygienic, was it?
The stories reached Mustique, the Caribbean holiday retreat of Princess Margaret. Bindon was invited to the island by a friend of its owner, Colin Tennant, who in 1975 asked John and Vicki to join the princess for lunch.
I think it was Colin who started it, said, you know, John, Ma'am knows about your advantage in life that you were given. She'd really like to see it. And I was kind of like slightly bemused, and I thought this can't really be true. Anyway, and they wandered onto the beach, and John was asked to present himself at court and his goods and chattels, and they were admired and talked about and discussed. And they all turned around and came back and sat back down again, and the lady in waiting sat down and quite courageously said, "Well, quite honestly, I've seen bigger."
The incident sparked rumours in Fleet Street of an attraction between Bindon and the Princess.
Margaret had a terrific, an enormous sexual charisma. People who met Margaret in the flesh were instantly bedazzled by this sexuality, which is why she attracted the men. They wanted her.
And the sort of people whom Princess Margaret and her ilk found attractive were these rather naughty, villainous people. And Margaret encouraged them. She loved to hear these really nasty, dirty stories. With foul language, you could use it if the moment was right. Bindon was just the sort to sit on her right-hand side and amuse me, John. And Princess Margaret, for all her breeding, is blood and flesh, and I have a strong feeling that she most likely equally found him immensely attractive.
The press picked up the rumours. The Daily Mail carried a denial from the Princess, claiming she'd never met John Bindon. She said her detective recognised him immediately and ensured there was no possibility of an embarrassing situation. But was it the truth?
Hold it!
By 1978, actor John Bindon had an impressive array of film and TV credits, mostly as gangster and thug.
It's only Hazel and me, Ned. I just want to have a talk, one-to-one.
Yeah, I'll have you first, Orner.
Any shooting, Ned, and Hazel will get it first.
But the acting work had dried up. He'd proved unreliable, and things seemed to go wrong on set.
I remember them losing the rushes one day. Now, I'm not absolutely sure if John took the rushes or whatever, but they had to reshoot the scene, you know.
Earnings also dried up, and Bindon was made bankrupt for unpaid taxes. His main income was now the protection rackets and drug deals on his Fulham patch. The craze helped him control the West End of London. He helped them control the East.
That was the kind of relationship that he had with the twins. He was one of the hardest men in London. If they had a problem in the East, in Fulham, they would contact John. And if John had a problem over the South, he would contact them. The same with us. In the Neshes, we were the same. If you've got a bar or a spieler or a nightclub, and someone is coming and giving you a bit of a headache, a nuisance, and he comes from that area, that would be the problem.
And how would that usually be resolved?
All different ways. He would be just told to stay away from there, firmly told. And if he didn't, then something else would happen. He would get hurt.
But on a November night in 1978, it was Bindon who got hurt. He owed a rival gang money for cocaine, and they were looking for him. At the Ranelagh Yacht Club, under the arches of Putney Railway Bridge, he joined friends for a drink. The club's banner of nautical respectability was a cover for its real clientele. That night, a stranger had signed in. South London gangster Johnny Dark, a man with a fearsome reputation for violence, known for carrying guns and knives. An hour later, his body was dragged out by two members of his so-called Wild Bunch gang. He'd been stabbed 9 times in a fight that turned club and alleyway into a bloodbath. Badly injured, Bindon had staggered to a nearby house.
The phone goes and John goes, "Baby?" I go, "Yeah." I'm like, "What have you done?" He goes, "This is probably the last phone call I'll ever make to you because I'm dying." He goes, "I'm seriously hurt. Get some money together, put a couple of shirts in a bag and come round." There's blood coming out of him, his heart here, like this, boom, boom, boom. And he's pouring with blood from his neck. and his friend Lenny was sitting on the floor holding his hands, and all his fingers were like hanging off. And I went, you know, this is not real. I had like this long white Victorian skirt on, and I tore the bottom layer off, and I was making bandages out of it. There's all these kind of like heavyweight South London villains coming in going, what's happening, you know, what can we do? And they're going like, John's going, it's over, this is it, it's over, I'm going to die here. The doctor came, stitched this guy's fingers back on, tried to stitch John. He had a big cut here, he had his throat cut, he had a cut in, I mean, he had several bad cuts. And the police in the meantime were flying up and down the road, and they thought somebody had been hit by the train. There was so much claret, as they call it. John said, my mother's Irish, let me get to Ireland or the police are going to nick me. We get into the car, everybody's bleeding, moaning, hurt, angry. And I just think, right, we've got to get to the airport.
Calls were going out from London to Dublin. Underworld contacts in the IRA could arrange a hideout for Bindon. But first, he'd have to act his way past the police at Heathrow. Details of his escape and the disposal of crucial evidence had been guarded secrets, until now.
On the way to the airport, they're breaking up what was obviously the weapons or what they used, and they were throwing weapons out. And it was like the panic of the moment. So we drove Jojo to London Airport, and we went up to the desk, and I said, my boyfriend's just been in a really bad rugby fight, in a rugby match, but he's got to get back to Ireland for another match tomorrow. Can I buy 2 tickets to Ireland? One for Lenny, one for John. They were a little bit hesitant because John had put a big scarf around his neck, but the blood was coming through from his neck wound, and he had a big cut here into his eye. He said, I won't make it. And he just sort of trundled through. I mean, barely, big, awesome John was like a really seriously wounded animal.
Back at the yacht club, Bindon's friends were busy cleaning and polishing to get rid of evidence. 60 members had witnessed the fight, yet all vanished within minutes, along with the membership book they'd signed. Detective Chief Superintendent George Mould found few signs the fight had even happened. More than 20 years later, the retired gangbuster's identity must still be protected.
Not much evidence that some violence had been ensuing. There was not a lot of blood about. The glasses had been cleaned and put away. One might suspect to avoid anyone's fingerprints being found there, of course.
But I can imagine there'd be idiots if they didn't do that. Do you know what I mean? It's obvious, isn't it, you were going to do that, you know what I mean? And then, but I don't know, I wasn't there, so I should imagine they did do it, but I don't know. My club I would have done.
Back home, Vicki began a clean-up of her own with the help of Bindon's sister Geraldine. During the escape, he'd stopped off to pick up a suitcase.
He said, get rid of all the evidence. Everything was just covered in blood. Everything was bloody. It was just blood. And I remember picking all the white rugs up and running a bath and putting them all into soak, and I filled the bath up and it was bright, bright red, trying to get all the blood out. And John had left his boots, which were snakeskin, and I sat down on the ground with his sister and we shredded his snakeskin boots and we burnt them. And I was saying to myself, right, this is what a mole does, this is what a mole would do. And like, you know, shades of Bonnie and Clyde or whatever.
Despite the cover-up, George Mould soon identified John Bindon as the prime suspect. But the detective wasn't sure his famous fugitive was still alive.
We were told that he'd been stabbed, so it was possible that he died and his body disposed of. We had another man who'd had his nose cut off. There were a lot of knives being flashed about and machetes in that club that night. But we were looking for him, and we put the word out that we wanted to see him if he was about.
About 5:15, I thought, John's back, because the front door was going boing, boing, boing. and the police just poured in. And they just kind of like dispersed like ants. They were just everywhere. Where is he? Where is he? And I said, he's not here, he's not here. He's with Serena or Mary or Jane or anybody, but not here. He's not here. And the bath was kind of like bobbing with blood-stained lambskin rugs, and the fire was going put-put with the remains of the snakeskin boots and his clothes.
Did you think at any time that you might be charged with anything, particularly with helping
No,
them?
I wasn't guilty of anything. I mean, aiding and abetting what? I was aiding and abetting the man I love. And he came to me for help, and I gave him help, and he was gone. But nobody asked me. They said, is he here? He wasn't there.
Bindon was already in Dublin, but his stabbed lung had collapsed on the flight. Instead of an IRA hideout, he went to St. Vincent's Hospital, where surgeons found that one of the stabs had nicked his heart. By the next morning, his whereabouts were known to the London underworld. The Hospital Sisters of Charity were no guard against those out for revenge. To have armed protection, Bindon contacted George Mould and gave himself up.
He didn't look very well. He had tubes coming out of various parts of his anatomy. But he seemed to be playing the part of a tough guy, standing up to his reputation that he had in the acting profession. He described a little what happened at the club and gave a few names of people who had been there, putting himself forward pretty well as the injured party. He wanted to come home and clear it all up.
Bindon agreed to return of his own accord, but only after a last romantic weekend in Dublin. He called Vicki.
He said to me, now, listen, Hodgie, he used to call me Hodgie. Serena's over here.
Bindon would spend his final hours of freedom with another flame, Serena Williams, ex-Playboy bunny and former girlfriend of soccer coach Malcolm Allison.
He hurt me seriously, as if he'd physically hurt me. I never forgave him that. I put myself completely on the line for him. Done.
On board the St. Columba ferry from Dublin, Bindon gave himself up to detectives. He claimed Dark had stabbed him and had used his own knife only in self-defense. George Mould took a different view.
Bindon had made a statement saying that he did stab him. So a body dying of stab wounds and a man who admitted having stabbed him decided there was evidence to charge him with murder.
On remand in Brixton Jail, John Bindon faced life imprisonment. He would plead not guilty on the basis of self-defense, but he'd no defense over Serena. His first plea was to Vicki.
J. Bindon, HM prison number B24281. Dearest darling Hodgie, 11 years with you was the best sentence I ever had. I miss you, kiddo. But I suppose that's all part of loving you.
I was very, very angry. But I did what a good woman should do, and I went to see him every day and looked after him and gave him a morale boost. I used to take him a Mandrax, a Mandy. I used to put it in my mouth, and I used to give John a big kiss in the morning and wrap this little pill up in a piece of cling film, give it to him, and it would keep him cool for the whole day.
You actually supplied drugs to him when I was in prison.
Mm-hmm. Naughty, but nice for him. I mean, I didn't want him to explode like a keg of dynamite in Brixton Prison. That would have been him. He'd been gone. It would have been over.
Bindon felt sure that self-defense would save him from jail. But a fellow prisoner suddenly put a very different slant on the case. He told police Bindon had bragged of being a hired hitman and paid £10,000 to murder Johnny Dark. Bindon's freedom now depended on a last epic performance before an Old Bailey jury. Accused of being a contract killer, John Bindon prepared his defense. He'd gone to the Ranelagh Yacht Club with Serena's souvenir hunting knife tucked into his snakeskin boot. Not as a hired hitman, but as someone in fear of his life over a drugs debt. the club was unusually busy.
When I went up there, of course, it was full of faces, and I thought, it's unusual. There was a guy who John had took some Charlie off as a sample, and John being John, he'd had a party with it. And the story was that the guy was going to go up to the yacht club to have it with, like, it was going to be all off up there, you know. And that was why he was tooled up. Because the firm that he took it off, apparently, was heavy duty, and they wasn't too pleased about it.
Among the unusual faces was South London gangster Johnny Dark, who had 15 convictions, including armed robbery and wounding. He'd also been cleared of murder. Dark was with his Wild Bunch gang, and this was not their patch. A fight broke out, with Roy Dennis throwing the first punch.
I put him on the floor, but he got up. But I didn't realise that he had a blade. Done me down there, cut me around there and stabbed me in the back twice.
Come on, Jay. Leave that. He's heading up. You'll kill him. What's that, Jim? Come, leave it out. You'll kill him. And I felt this sharp blow to my back. Stop there! Leave it. Don't. You'll kill him, mate. Don't just got on top of me. Pinned my arms down by my side so I couldn't move. Then he stabbed me in the chest.
I'm gonna go now, you fat bastard.
There was a pain and a coldness. It was like there was an icicle stuck in there. I could see the handle of the knife sticking out my chest. I really did think I was gonna die. I started circling the knife around my face, as if he was deciding where to put it next. He jabbed the knife at my left eye. I jerked my head to the right. At first I thought it went into my eye. And I was literally screaming for help. And it made me realise that this man was completely mad. And he'd keep stabbing me until I was dead. I saw Lenny Osborne appear above Dark. And he went to cut my throat.
As the blade ran across Bindon's throat, a badly wounded Lenny Osborne returned to the fray with a machete and slashed Dark across the spine.
Serena's knife had almost come out of my boot. It must have come out in a struggle. And then he came at me. I lunged at him and stabbed him in the chest. I might have stabbed him more than once, I can't remember. But if I hadn't have gone for him when I did, he would have definitely finished me off.
Everyone was running about, screaming, and there was claret all over the place. It was horrible. I see one of them get over the head with a bottle of vodka. I see one just trying to get out of the way, and someone tried to cut his throat and missed him and caught him under the nose. I think that's what happened to him. Yeah, good scene. Pleasant. Nice way to spend a Monday afternoon.
I was bleeding a lot. I thought I only had minutes to live. I remember wanting to go and sit by the river. I saw blood pumping out of my chest.
But the prosecution had a very different script. It cast Dark as the target of a gangland hit, and Bindon as the £10,000 contract killer, paid half up front.
If the police are to be believed, I must be the first hitman to give myself up. How they had the front to come up with that crap is beyond me. Roll on the trial. You're Biffo.
The story of an actor whose murderous screen character came to life would unfold on the ultimate criminal stage, number 1 court of the Old Bailey. The prosecution said the club brawl was not planned, but became a smokescreen for Bindon to carry out the contract on Dark, and then pretend it was self-defense. They said he'd boasted about the hit to another inmate, convicted murderer William Murphy. Bindon denied the allegation, with an echo from his debut film, Poor Cow.
Well, what do you mean?
The only straight policeman you'll ever see is possibly The top man in England, or the ones on the zebra crossing. All the other ones with their little moody blue raincoats and their tough boots, they're all bent, love.
Bindon told the jury he'd been framed by bent detectives who'd invented the story of a contract killing. The prosecution said there were motives for the underworld wanting Dark dead. They said he was blackmailing two men who'd paid him to burn down a nightclub, that he was a police informant and had stolen heroin and £25,000 from another gang. To persuade the jury otherwise, Bindon called on a celebrity friend who spoke of the man he knew. Bob Hoskins, star of the gangster film The Long Good Friday, was called to the stand as a character witness.
The barrister for the prosecution asked Bob Hoskins why Johnny was called Biffo, meaning because he was ready to hit anybody, you know. And Bob turned it round, you see. He said, Biffo, of course, look at him. I mean, they used to call him Biffo the Bear because he's so lovely and cuddly. I mean, look at him, look at him, look at him, Biffo the Bear, you know. And the judge sort of said, Mr. Hoskins, I don't think we need any show business funny remarks here, thank you. The solicitor phoned me up and said, I don't think the judge is very keen on show business character witnesses, so you needn't come tomorrow morning.
Detective Chief Superintendent George Mould watched the juries starstruck as Hoskins and Bindon made them laugh.
He was smiling across at Bindon, who kept up a very happy and relaxed appearance right throughout the trial, as if confident of his acquittal.
For the jury, Bindon ran through a gamut of emotions, from confidence to sadness to remorse. After 12 hours deliberation, the jury found John Bindon not guilty of all charges. He was bundled from court a free man, telling reporters the moment Bob Hoskins took the stand, he knew he'd won.
I think John Bindon was a very lucky man to be acquitted on the evidence that was put forward. I believe that the appearance of Bob Hoskins as a character witness had some influence on the jury. They certainly seemed to appreciate his appearance.
The acquittal also ended 7 months in prison for the Cray's friend Joe Pyle. He'd been remanded, suspected of helping Bindon escape to Dublin, a charge he's always denied. Without a murder, there was no crime to assist. Mr. Justice Mars Jones told the court he had certainly not heard the whole truth of what happened that night, and it might seem that witnesses had been got at in an attempt to mislead the jury. More than 20 years later, no one fully knows the true script of Bindon and Dark's dramatic fight to the death. The truth about Mustique was revealed in the Daily Mirror the next day. A photograph of Princess Margaret on the beach with John Bindon, his T-shirt proclaiming, "Enjoy cocaine." Her denial they'd even met now looked less than convincing, forcing many to conclude she'd protested too much.
Perhaps John boasted of it, but I don't think he ever mounted a royal, unlike myself.
Vicki Hodge would later find herself the focus of royal revelations in the arms of Prince Andrew. John Bindon would fall back into obscurity, the screen gangster mortally wounded by his alter ego in real life.
Friends that had claimed that they were very close friends of his while he was sort of a personality just dropped him. But after that, his career just went down. He didn't work again after that, not really. Without doubt, his best performance was at #1 court in the Old Bailey.
Fame and fortune paled into loneliness and decline. In 1993, after years of promiscuity and drug abuse, John Bindon died with AIDS.
When I heard he was dead, a huge piece of my heart froze. He didn't have respect for the extension he had on his life after the Johnny Dark incident. He just went on living it the same way, and I think he died in, turmoil. A human being who definitely left an indelible stamp. But if you want to die young, live like John.
I had his funeral in my pub. The people that came in from right across the spectrum, a lot of people from showbiz world, a lot of his pals, a lot of villains, a lot of gangsters, ex-gangsters, people who he knew, you know. It was a big funeral.
Absent from the funeral was his life-saving friend Lenny Osborne, the man who dragged off Johnny Dark, but who mysteriously disappeared before the trial, leaving many afraid to break an underworld code of silence over that fateful November night, fearful of men like Bindon and the violent characters he played.
The officers arrest a man trying to escape through a high-rise window in total emergency at night tomorrow. Back to tonight, Clint Eastwood stars in our movie as the tough-talking cop returns to tackle a new case and a new partner. The thriller sequel to Dirty Harry, The Enforcer, is our pick of the day.